All right, so we're diving into aluminum enclosures today. I've got to say, the stuff you sent over is pretty interesting.
Yeah, they're more exciting than people think.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the things that keep our gadgets and gizmos running, from basic electronics all the way to like industrial equipment. And there's actually a ton to learn about these enclosures.
Oh, yeah. They're often overlooked, but they're critical.
Yeah.
Like, without them, most modern tech just wouldn't work.
That's crazy. I'm looking around now and seeing enclosures everywhere.
Right?
So how are they actually made?
Good question.
You gave me info on die casting and extrusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to admit, those terms sound a little intimidating at first.
Yeah, they can be a mouthful.
But now,
Hmm.
now I think I'm ready to become like the aluminum enclosure guru.
Uh-huh. I have no doubt. And you're right, they sound complex, but they're really not that bad once you understand them. Let's start with die casting.
Okay, die casting.
So imagine you have a mold, right?
Okay, a mold.
Super precise, like incredibly detailed, with all these channels and chambers, kind of like an ant colony. And then picture molten aluminum being injected into it under high pressure. It cools and solidifies in the exact shape of the mold, and boom, you've got this detailed, smooth enclosure.
Wow. Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It's like creating a metal sculpture, but with like insane precision.
Exactly.
No wonder it's used for stuff like those meter boxes and switchboards where you need all the detail and that sleek, modern look.
Exactly. And die casting is great because you can have thin walls, so the enclosures are lightweight, which helps with handling and portability. Plus, aluminum itself has natural shielding properties against radio and electromagnetic frequencies.
So it's perfect for sensitive electronics.
Exactly.
Okay, so die casting sounds pretty awesome. Intricate design, smooth finish, lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any downside? I mean, nothing's perfect, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, you got me there. Like with any manufacturing process, there are always trade-offs. One thing to keep in mind is cost. Die casting needs these complex molds, which can be pretty pricey, especially if you're only doing a small production run.
So it's not the best option if you only need a few enclosures.
Probably not, no.
Makes sense. I'm guessing it's way more cost-effective when you're manufacturing on a larger scale. You know, like for huge projects where you need tons of identical enclosures.
Exactly.
Okay, what else? Any other downsides?
Well, there's also porosity to consider.
Porosity.
Remember how we talked about the molten aluminum being injected into the mold?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes tiny air bubbles can get trapped during that process, so you end up with these small voids in the final product.
Ah, so it's not a completely solid piece of metal.
Right.
Is that a problem? Like, does that matter?
It really depends on what you're using the enclosure for. For a lot of things, a little porosity isn't a big deal. But if you need something airtight or a super smooth surface, then you might need to take extra steps.
I see. So like for medical implants or high-precision optical equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so die casting has its pros and cons, just like anything else.
Pretty much.
Ready to move on to extrusion. I'm curious how that works.
Absolutely. It's a totally different approach.
Okay.
And actually, it's pretty easy to picture.
Oh,
Think of those Play-Doh toys where you push the dough through a mold to make different shapes. Extrusion is kind of like the industrial version of that.
okay, I'm with you. So we're talking solid aluminum being forced through a die.
Yeah.
No molten metal this time.
Exactly. It's a continuous process, so you can make really long pieces with a consistent shape.
So it's like squeezing toothpaste.
Uh-huh.
But instead of toothpaste, it's aluminum. And you can cut it to the length you need for your enclosure.
That's a great way to put it. And since there's no melting and cooling, you don't really have to worry about porosity.
That makes sense.
Plus, it's a super cost-effective process, especially if you're making a lot of enclosures.
Gotcha. So if cost is a big factor and you don't need a super complex design, extrusion seems like the way to go.
Usually, yeah.
But what about strength?
Hmm.
Like, is it less durable because it's not one solid piece?
Not at all.
Really?
Extruded enclosures are known for being super tough. They can handle high temperatures, vibrations, impacts, all sorts of things.
So they're good for harsh environments.
Absolutely. Like protecting sensors on a factory floor or housing equipment for off-grid energy solutions.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So we've got die casting, which is great for precision and those smooth finishes.
Right.
And then extrusion, which is really durable and cost-effective.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how choosing between them really depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Definitely. It's all about finding the right process for the project.
But before we get into that, I'm curious about aluminum itself. Why is it such a good material for enclosures in the first place?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's something people don't think about enough. Aluminum has this unique combination of properties that makes it perfect for enclosures.
Like what?
Well, first of all, it's incredibly lightweight, which
Yeah.
is huge, especially for larger enclosures. Think about trying to install something heavy on a rooftop or in a tight space. Aluminum makes a big difference.
Yeah, I can imagine.
On top of that, it's naturally corrosion resistant.
Oh, right. I've heard about that.
It forms this protective oxide layer that shields it from the elements, so it doesn't rust or degrade over time.
So you don't have to worry about it falling apart and ruining expensive equipment.
Exact.
Okay, that's a big plus. What else?
Here's a cool one. Aluminum is also an amazing heat conductor.
Really? I thought you'd want an enclosure to keep things insulated.
Well, yeah, sometimes. But in a lot of cases, you actually want to get rid of heat, especially with sensitive electronics. And aluminum is fantastic at that.
So it's like a built-in cooling system.
Yeah.
That's pretty clever.
Mm.
So we've got lightweight, corrosion-resistant, heat-conducting.
Mm.
Anything else I should add to my list?
Well, we can't forget about recyclability.
Right.
Aluminum can be recycled over and over again without losing its properties, so it's a really sustainable choice for enclosures.
Okay, aluminum officially has my respect. Lightweight, durable, protective, sustainable.
I know, right?
It's like the superhero of enclosure materials.
Uh-huh. Pretty much.
So, knowing all this, how do we decide between die casting and extrusion for a specific project? I'm ready to put my aluminum enclosure knowledge to the test.
All right, let's get into it. Well, it comes down to this. You got to pick the process that best fits what you're trying to do. Like you said, you want intricate designs and a smooth finish. Go with die casting. Need something simple but super durable. Extrusion is your best bet.
Right, it's all about the right tool for the job. But what about those situations where it's not so clear-cut? Like, what if I need a simple shape, but I also need it to be really precise?
Ugh, yeah. There are definitely some gray areas. In those cases, you really have to weigh the pros and cons. Like, say you need a rectangular enclosure, right?
Yeah.
But it's got to have super tight tolerances because you're putting sensitive optical equipment in there. You might actually go with die casting, even though the shape itself is pretty basic.
Interesting. So the level of precision can kind of tip the scales one way or the other.
Exactly.
Okay, how about cost? Does the size of the production run ever make die casting a better option, even for simpler shapes?
For sure. Don't forget, making that die for die casting can be expensive up front. But that cost gets spread out over however many units you produce. So if you're making hundreds of thousands of enclosures, die casting might actually end up being cheaper in the long run, even if you could technically make the same shape with extrusion.
That makes sense. So it's like balancing act, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Shape, precision, cost, durability. It's kind of fascinating how it all comes together.
Absolutely. And we haven't even talked about the really cool part. The impact these enclosures have on innovation itself. It's easy to think of them as just simple boxes, but they're actually making all these technological advancements possible.
Okay, now you've got my attention. I love those hidden connections that show how these seemingly ordinary things are actually driving progress. So, spill the beans. How are aluminum enclosures shaping the world around us?
Well, think about the medical field. Aluminum enclosures are protecting all those delicate sensors and electronics in everything from portable ultrasound machines to pacemakers.
Wow.
They need to be lightweight and corrosion resistant, especially for something like a pacemaker that's implanted in the body. It's got to be reliable.
I never thought about it that way. It's amazing how something as simple as an enclosure can play such a big role in life-saving technology.
It really is.
And it's not just medicine, right? What about satellites? You mentioned those earlier.
Exactly. In space, the conditions are incredibly harsh. Extreme temperatures, radiation, the vacuum of space.
Yeah, it's a pretty unforgiving environment.
Exactly. Aluminum enclosures protect the sensitive electronics from all that.
So without them, our satellites wouldn't survive.
Not a chance. And those satellites are responsible for all sorts of things: communications, navigation, Earth observation data.
It's mind-blowing that those little boxes are helping us explore the cosmos.
Right.
So we've covered medicine, aerospace. What about everyday tech, the stuff we use all the time?
Well, look at your smartphone.
Okay.
It's got a thin-walled aluminum enclosure that houses all those components.
So that's why it's so light and sleek.
Exactly. And that enclosure also helps to dissipate heat.
So my phone doesn't melt in my hand.
Exactly. You're benefiting from the unique properties of aluminum every time you use it.
I'm starting to see enclosures everywhere now. It's like I've got this new appreciation for them.
I told you.
But I have a question. We've been talking about how aluminum enclosures are helping with current technology. But what about the future? Technology is always evolving. Will enclosures need to change too?
That's a great question, and the answer is a resounding yes. As technology gets more complex, more powerful, and more compact, enclosures will have to keep up.
So what might the future hold? What will these enclosures look like?
Well, for one, I think we'll see more specialization. Enclosures will be designed for the specific needs of the technology they're housing, instead of just being generic boxes.
So not one size fits all anymore.
Right. We might see enclosures with built-in cooling systems, advanced shielding to block interference, maybe even self-diagnostic features that can spot problems before they happen.
Wow, that sounds super high tech. Almost like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It's an exciting time to be working in this field, and with things like 3D printing becoming more common, we'll have way more flexibility in design and complexity. Imagine enclosures with these intricate internal structures that are optimized for airflow and heat dissipation, almost like they're organic.
Okay, now that's just wild, but it makes sense.
Right.
The more complex the tech, the more sophisticated the enclosure needs to be.
Exactly. And I think we'll also see a big push for sustainability.
In what way?
Well, maybe enclosures made from biodegradable materials or entirely from recycled aluminum, trying to reduce their environmental impact.
That would be amazing. So not only are these enclosures protecting our tech, they're also doing it in a way that's good for the planet. I love that. It's like innovation in one area can lead to positive change in another.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, with all these advancements coming, what does it mean for someone like me, or even our listener, who's just starting to learn about this stuff? It's kind of overwhelming to think about keeping up with all these changes.
I get it. It can be a lot. But honestly, the basic principles we talked about today, those are going to stay relevant.
So the stuff about die casting and extrusion, the properties of aluminum, all that.
Exactly. Those are the building blocks for making smart decisions about enclosures, no matter how much technology changes.
That's a relief. So it's like learning the alphabet of enclosure design. Once you know the basics, you can start forming words and sentences, even whole stories.
I like that analogy.
And hey, learning is an ongoing thing, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. The key is to stay curious and keep exploring.
Well said. You know, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to how much we rely on these enclosures. I mean, they're not just boxes, they're like the unsung heroes making so much of modern life possible. Yeah, they're like the silent backbone of all this technology, protecting the stuff that connects us, heals us, and helps us figure out the world.
It's not even just about protection, it's about making things possible in the first place. Like aluminum is so strong and light, and you can do so much with it. It's helped us shrink down electronics, push the limits in aerospace, and even create whole new industries.
I never thought about it like that. It's easy to get lost in the technical stuff like die casting versus extrusion, but when you zoom out, you see that enclosures are a huge part of how our world works.
For sure. And if you want to go even bigger picture, think about how aluminum enclosures are going to shape the future. We're making huge strides in AI, renewable energy, even space travel. And those enclosures will be right there with us, making sure the technology behind it all can survive and thrive.
Wow, it really is a chain reaction. Better enclosures mean better technology, which leads to a better world. And that brings us back to you, dear listener.
Yes, you're the one who's going to take all this knowledge and use it in your own projects, your own ideas. Maybe even come up with the next big innovation.
We've given you a peek into this world of aluminum enclosures, from the nitty-gritty of how they're made to the huge impact they have on technology and everything around us.
But now is your turn. What stuck with you from this deep dive? What got you curious?
Did you make any connections that we missed? What questions popped into your head?
Because that's what this is all about. Sparking your curiosity, getting you to explore, and giving you the tools to understand the tech that shapes your life.
So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep creating. Who knows, maybe your next project will be a success because of a humble but super important aluminum enclosure.
And maybe someday we'll be doing a deep dive on your amazing invention. But until then, happy building, everyone.
Yeah.